last year, thanks Katie for recording that, but last year, this year, and likely moving forward, it's been coordinated by UW Extension, but we still work closely in partnership with River Alliance, the Wisconsin DNR, the Citizen Lake Monitoring Network, and then of course, all of our lovely site leaders and volunteers. We do have a sister event that occurs on the same day in Minnesota. They do a similar AIS search on their waters, but they're looking primarily for starry stonewort, and it's therefore called the Starry Trek. And then as we go, I have this little crayfish that'll pop up once in a while. Our hot tip crayfish will be giving us a couple hot tips as we go along. So Snapshot Day, it's changed hands a little bit with who coordinates it, but the goals of the event haven't changed over the years. During Snapshot Day, we hope to identify new infestations of aquatic invasive species, thereby helping to prioritize future monitoring and management locations. And with our volunteer engagement, we want to educate new audiences about invasive species and inspire them to act. And then also hopefully those volunteers that you get during Snapshot Day are recruited as long-term aquatic invasive species volunteers for your program, as well as getting them introduced to other programs like CLMN and Project Red and all those other citizen science monitoring opportunities that are available to them. So the way we're achieving these goals is by having a whole host of site leaders across the state who hold local events and educate volunteers on identifying and monitoring for aquatic invasive species, and then sending those volunteers out to monitoring locations to collect that data. So this is just a map I wanted to show you of 2021 last year of all of the different site leader locations that we had across the state. It's pretty impressive. It's a nice little spread. I know there are some blank spaces that we're working to fill, but overall we have really good state coverage. You can see how quickly the importance of this event is portrayed through maps like this, because you know, DNR staff and AIS monitoring staff, there are only a few people compared to all the volunteers that we have out for this event monitoring. So it's a really data-rich event that we get a lot of really great data today. So that's why we're here today, to teach you how to be a site leader if you're brand new, or to refresh you on how to be a site leader if you are a seasoned Snapshot veteran. As a site leader, you'll have a few responsibilities that we'll go over, and we're going to go over all these in pretty specific detail. Just broadly, those responsibilities are to plan for the day ahead, assist in outreach and recruitment and volunteer recruitment, and then to host the event the day of and lead training and identification, and then after the event, do data entry. So again, we're going to break those down a little bit more. Here's a slide with a lot of words on it. With planning, we would like you to attend or watch the site leader webinars. So check for you. Good job today. You already have one of these done. You'll also need to select your monitoring sites, find a training site for the day of the event, coordinate with your volunteers, and provide some supplies. Some are provided by Extension, and we're going to go over that. And then when doing your volunteer outreach and recruitment, you'll promote your event locally using the resources that we provide. You'll help us to recruit a few volunteers for your site. 4 to 20 is a great number, depending on the size of your Snapshot Day. And then if you want, you can seek out local sponsors to provide refreshments. It's not necessary. It's just something if you want to do that. Culver's is sponsoring Snapshot Day again this year. So everyone who participates in Snapshot Day will get one of those coupons for a free scoop of ice cream. So there are refreshments provided in that way. And then hosting the event the day of, you'll assist with training volunteers the morning of the event. You'll help them to verify species and enter data into SWIMS. You'll send in copies of all your forms and data sheets. You'll submit photos and voucher specimens as needed. I know that sounds like a lot at first, but we tell you this every year, there's no need to panic, okay? We're gonna help you along the way. We are providing the training here. We'll help you with some AIS monitoring supplies. There's gonna be plenty of training and promotion and outreach resources located in the AIS partnership box. I'm gonna show you that in a second. We're gonna give you protocols, and then we have a centralized registration process for all of the volunteers who will be volunteering at your sites. So if you're not familiar with the AIS box, or you haven't had access to it, just shoot me an email and I'll get you registered for it. It's the useful site. It stores all of our AIS resources. And it also has a folder here specifically on Snapshot Day. So within that folder, you can select any of these boxes, really. Photos by location, that's for your day of event photos, and there's a spot for you to submit your data after the event. But I want you to look at this folder here called Site Leader Resources. So you'll see if you click that folder, all these other folders here for you, anything related to volunteer recruitment, recorded trainings. This recorded training will be in the box, training resources, data sheets, everything you need, it's all in the box. So again, if you don't have access to box, just let me know and I can get you hooked up. All right, so Snapshot Day timeline here. There's a series of steps that will occur here leading up to the main Snapshot Day event. And all the dates are listed here as a reminder. Again, thank you for attending Site Leader training today. Each of these dates have changed a little bit depending on coordinators of Snapshot Day. So this year I chose these different dates and deadlines based on what was used in the past and what I thought would work best based on my experience as a site leader. So we'll send out a post-event survey. We'll be asking you how you felt about this timeline so we can continue to improve it. So just know if something's not working for you, then there will be a chance for you to report on that. So you got your site leader training happening today. You commit to being a site leader. You have to select your monitoring sites. The volunteers will register. You'll send me a list of your equipment needs. Then I'll send you that equipment. I'll help train the volunteers. I'll talk to you about that a little bit. There's the actual day itself. And then we have some wrap up with data entry and voucher submission. So if you want, you can go ahead and jot these down if you just want to put them on your calendar right away. But know that after I get a finalized list of site leaders, I'm going to send out many an email with deadline and date reminders. So if you don't write these down now, I will definitely be reminding you. Okay, so we're going to go into all the details on all those steps now, but first things first, you need to commit to being a site leader. This is basically just you letting me know your contact information so that I can coordinate with you, give you those dates, give you updates and information. I'm going to send out a Google form for you to fill out for that. I know a lot of you have already registered to be a site leader, but some of you haven't that are registered for this training. So Katie is going to very nicely drop a link in the chat that has the form to register for site leader training. So I know that many site leaders are seasonal LTEs and interns. If you're having a seasonal staff member coordinate this event and you know that, but they aren't hired yet, that's totally fine. I know everyone's in the midst of hiring right now. Just use your contact information now so you can stay in the know, and then we can change it later. Okay, so the next step in the planning process is choosing the training site where you'll actually host the event. This is your central location for the day of. It's where you'll meet your volunteers. It's where you'll train them. And then that's also where they reconvene after their monitoring sites. Consider having your training site in a central location in relation to your monitoring sites, just so that people aren't, just so that you're minimizing the amount that people have to drive. A couple things to keep in mind with your training location. Keep in mind accessibility and inclusivity in terms of places where wheelchairs and mobility limited folks can access. We don't want to have people hiking, a couple miles into the woods just to get towards a lake so you can teach them how to identify invasive species. I'm going to give you a couple examples of good places to have training site locations. You likely won't have to pay a fee for a location if you plan it right. And so free is really nice for those training site locations. And it's also nice to choose a location that already has things like picnic tables and garbage cans. It's less that you have to plan for and carry around. And so that being said, some good places to have a training site are park pavilions. Just if you host a training at a park pavilion, just make sure you check with who maintains the park to see if you need to reserve pavilions. Boat landings are really great places to hold trainings outside your office location if that's available to you. Outside always seems to work nicely, but if it comes down to it, you can always also reserve a library room at most public libraries. So that site leader commitment and training locations, those are due on May 14th. And again, the link to do that registration is in the chat. So I have a couple examples of past training sites, so you can see the way that people have done this in the past and set up their training site locations. Again, you're really going to want a table, either brought by you or provided at your location, because you're going to have a lot of stuff to show people. You're going to have your identification materials and all of your field equipment and things like that. So a table is going to be really nice for you. Here's an example of Steph doing a training at a boat landing. We have Shelby here doing a nice training at a park that has some open green space. It looks like she's at a boat landing. But also, you know, if you need to have your training sites inside, then you can make that work for you as well in a conference room or a library room at your office. Okay. The next thing you want to do is choose the sites that you'll be sending volunteers to. And you'll want to choose sites where you can, first of all, there aren't really many limitations to sites that you choose. If you just want to choose a site that like maybe doesn't have any data added, or choose a site that you want to do follow-up monitoring at, you're very welcome to do that. But if you want to do a little bit more targeted monitoring, you can choose sites where you can verify past AIS reports, or where you can locate new AIS sites. Those sites could be downstream from known AIS populations if you're monitoring on a river or a flowage and want to see if something spread downstream. High use sites are a really great location if you want to monitor at high use boat landings or high use canoe launches. Sites no one has been to at all or haven't been to for a while that you want to do a double check on. Those are all really good reasons to add a site to your monitoring list. And again, the site should be easily accessible. Think about, you know, you're sending volunteers out to these sites. And so think about creating a positive experience for the volunteer. You're not going to want to send them down super steep slopes or sites where that you know have poisonous plants. And so that's where checking your sites ahead of time comes in handy, just so that you can make sure that those sites are easily accessible to volunteers. It's okay to choose more sites than you think you need and to narrow it down based on the weather or the ability of your volunteers. Usually 4 sites is a good medium goal for the day of, but you can pick more if you want to narrow it down based on the number of volunteers you have, or once you learn the volunteers' preferences in terms of being able to access sites, you can narrow it down from there as well. So those monitoring sites will be due on June 3rd. And again, I'm going to be sending out many emails to remind you to do that. And I'll also be sending out a link to, it'll be a Google form for you to fill out those monitoring sites. So as you're going through the process of finding sites, make sure you check in with your DNR regional AIS coordinator. They might have some sites in mind that need to be sampled and could make suggestions on good sites for volunteers to visit. Just let them know where your training site will be so they can suggest sites that are nearby. So you can see these coordinators have big areas. So if you email Shelby and ask, where should I monitor? I think the first question she's going to ask you is, where are you in her area? So she can help you monitor, narrow down those sites. Those regional AIS coordinators are also a really great resource for other Snapshot Day things, like assistance with SWIMS data entry, specimen vouchering, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So great resources, those coordinators. If you don't know who yours is, here's a map of their coverage area. This is a little bit of a side note. Matt Walrath shared some of the pre-planning his LTE has done for this event, and I thought it was kind of a cool idea, so I wanted to share it. This LTE went out to scout sites ahead of time and took notes and made detailed notes to help her on the day of the event. Excuse me. And she ranked all of those sites in order from easiest to get to or walk around, or you could rank them by priority if you want. And that was so that she could work with mobility limitations the day of. So just putting a little bit of forethought into that. You can see she went out. This is a really great project for interns if you have them, by the way, or LTEs. She has info on the site name and location. And then she also has notes here of things like Access is easiest from the north side. There's rocks to climb around, things like that, so that when you have the day of your event, you're not scrambling around looking for good sites for your volunteers to access. So next you'll have to work on volunteer recruitment as the event gets closer. This was something a lot of site leaders have asked for assistance on. And so we're going to go over this in more detail. If you want to start promoting now with some save the dates and short articles, go on right ahead and do that. It's never too soon to start doing that. We've started promoting a little bit on Facebook. Volunteer registration is going to open on June 20th. So that's also a great time to start promoting more heavily, as you'll have the link that I make for volunteers to register. So in the box, as usual, we'll be providing this social media and outreach toolkit. And based on volunteer surveys that we've had in the past about Snapshot Day, a vast majority of volunteers find out about Snapshot Day from social media. So I know that's not everyone's favorite thing to manage Facebook and Twitter and write press releases, but it's actually really important for getting the word out. And this toolkit has pre-written Facebook posts. It has newsletter and press release examples. It has nice pictures from last year. So make sure you utilize this. We're going to give you a lot of resources, but then to a certain extent, it's your responsibility to utilize them. Aside from social media at your own organization's site, you can also share with other groups or reach out to other groups. You can attend local meetings, submit newsletter articles to groups like Trout Unlimited, paddling groups, scout groups, lake associations. Those have all been really great partners for Snapshot Day in the past. Go to local TV stations, local newspapers. All of those places are really great ways to get the word out about Snapshot Day. If you would like to get sponsors for refreshments in addition to the Culver's coupons, that's your right. You can do that to get maybe other little snackies and refreshments the day of. I would recommend reaching out to local cafes, maybe local outfitters and grocery stores. Big box stores, as kind of like on a side tip, big box stores are likely to need several months heads up. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for sponsors, it might be good to start asking them kind of like nowish. And then also, if you get a sponsor separate from Culver's, just let us know so we can recognize them in our outreach materials and our wrap-up materials. We can thank them. So like we did last year, volunteers are going to register through a Google form again, and I will update a Google Sheet for you to inform you of the volunteers that are registered at your site. So again, I'm going to send you a link to that as volunteers start signing up. And every day we will update that form that includes all of your volunteers who have been registering. And it'll include their name and contact information, as well as any equipment they'll be able to bring. And it will also include, we'll ask them preferences on the types of the parts of the protocol that they're comfortable with. If they're not comfortable getting in the water or wading into the water or anything like that, that information will be provided to you once those volunteers register. So volunteers prefer for you to contact them about 2 weeks ahead of time if you're able to. And we ask that at least a week before. Make sure you contact folks and confirm start times, directions, reiterate how to dress, what supplies you need them to bring. Make sure you check that Google form in advance, and again, see how they self-identify with those parts of the protocols that they're comfortable with. There is, just to reiterate this again, there is something for everyone to do, be it getting in the water, note takers, specimen collectors, assisting with decontamination. And so just because someone doesn't want to get in the water doesn't mean they can't participate in Snapshot Day. There are a lot of other ways for them to participate. And so we hope that this is an event that is accessible to everyone. A good goal for volunteer recruitment is broad. It really depends where you are. I know that rural areas usually get fewer volunteers. It's nice to have around 2 to 10 teams that you send out, which is, I know that's a broad range, but it just depends where you are, you guys. So it's nice to have 2 to 10 teams with 2 to 5 individual per team, okay? So anywhere from 2 to 20 volunteers, anywhere in between there is great. It's easiest to manage with around 10 volunteers. And so if you get lots of signups and you're not sure that you can handle that many people, reach out to help. You can contact me, contact your local DNR coordinator, or maybe another conservationist in the area. They'll be able to assist you and to help you out there. We'll find someone that will be able to help you if you end up getting tons and tons of volunteers. That's a good problem to have. Okay, so the next thing we need to think about is the supplies you'll need for the day of. So you got your volunteers all registered. Now we're thinking about the supplies that you'll need to prepare for Snapshot Day. We will provide some things, but you will need to provide some things as well. You'll need to provide, again, we talked about tables. So tables for registration and specimen display. Again, if you do this at a park or a boat landing, a lot of times they have tables available for you. If not, then you'll need to bring your own, I would recommend. You'll also need to have a decontamination station. We will offer some supplies for that if you don't have them already. We're offering, again, boot brushes and spray bottles for folks to decontaminate their gear. You'll want to bring garbage bags for throwing away any specimens that volunteers bring back that you don't need. Or a lot of times at these park locations, garbage cans are available to you. You'll need to provide clipboards for data collection, so folks have something to record their data on. And then hand scoops are optional. There's instructions for creating a hand scoop available in the box. Again, this is something that's optional for sediment sifting. And again, refreshments are optional. And again, everyone will be getting those Culver's coupons for free ice cream. We provide some things as well. We provide the sign-in forms to keep track of the people who are coming. The liability forms, we'll also be sending those to you as well. Each volunteer will have to fill out a liability form. We'll be giving you some nice swag, some pencils, bags, and we'll be giving you pre-filled data sheets, baggies for specimen collection, ID resources. Again, those is needed.
Hey, Emily, we lost you for like 20 seconds. Do you want to repeat that?
Oh, sure. Where did you lose me at?
It was just like 20 seconds. Oh, okay. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I can start over on this slide here. Sorry about that. I just got a message that my internet is unstable. So hopefully it doesn't keep doing that. So again, we provide those sign-in and liability forms. Each volunteer has to sign a liability form. We'll give you pencils, pre-filled data sheets, so there's less for you to fill out the day of. We're going to give you baggies for specimen collection. Identification resources will be available in the box for you. Boot brushes so that people can clean off their gear between sites. Spray bottles to help with that. And then swag bags, you can see them down here with the Snapshot Day logo. Volunteers like those bags. And so we'll be providing those again. And then we can also sometimes provide rakes. Those are a little bit spendy to ship around. And so we're going to ask this year that if you need a rake, we can send you guidance on how to make one of those. But if you really, really need a rake, we're going to figure out a way to get you one, gall darn it. So equipment provided by us is limited. So we'll be sending out an equipment survey in June, asking you what you need from us. So I want to stop and ask, are there any questions so far about planning? And if you have questions, you can unmute yourself too.
We don't have any in the chat right now.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move right along here. All right, you made it through planning. Let's fast forward to August 20th. It's the big day. What's going to happen? So here is just a suggested agenda for the day of. Make sure you just modify this based on your local needs. So what we suggest is that from 8:30 to 9, that's the time when volunteers arrive. They fill out those liability forms, gather packets, etc. Basically just gearing up for the event and welcoming your volunteers. And then from 9 to 9:45 or so, we would like for you to provide a brief AIS identification training that's based on locally relevant species of your choosing. I'm gonna show you a list of the target species, and there are a lot of them. There is absolutely no need to go over all of the target species with volunteers. In fact, I would discourage you from doing from doing that, just because it can be really overwhelming for those volunteers. And even the species that you teach them the day of, they're by no means required to remember all of them, just to get an idea of what they look like so they can grab any suspects. You'll also go over safety protocols, monitoring protocols, how to fill out data sheets, and decontamination. And then you'll send them out to their sites from about 9:45 to noon. Have them reconvene at the training site to go over their data, to look at specimens, to double check their data sheets, things like that. And really use this time as a teachable moment. So if someone's going to bring back a native species, which they most likely will, show them how to identify those things. Show them why those native species are not invasive species, or if someone brings back something invasive, make sure you show everyone an example of that. Because I know when you're teaching these things, there's not always a live specimen to show people. And so that can be really valuable when people bring things back, to use those samples as teachable moments. So about those target species, when folks go out, we have a list of 25 species to look out for. Again, volunteers do not need to look for all 25 of these. You are very welcome to modify species based on your local needs. So for example, if you're monitoring a bridge site and you're looking primarily for aquarium release species, maybe your training is more focused on those species, most likely found in aquarium dumps. Or if you know your site is downstream from a New Zealand mud snail infestation, I would cover what New Zealand mud snails look like. So, just feel free to modify these things based on your local experiences. In the box, again, in the AIS box, I'll have a host of training and identification materials to help you out. You're welcome to make your own. However you want to train your volunteers is totally fine. I'm also going to host a recorded volunteer training to briefly go over each of the species with volunteers. We'll also be going over protocols, so they have a little background before you train them more thoroughly. And the point of that is to get volunteers exposed to what some of those invasive species look like, exposed to those monitoring protocols before you train them, so that the day of, when you're training them again in person, hopefully things will stick a little bit better and they'll be very comfortable with those protocols. So bottom line here, modify the species list based on your local needs, and don't require volunteers to be able to 100% identify everything. That's your job, with the help of the regional AIS coordinators, to help them identify things. They'll bring all kinds of things back to you that they think might be invasive, and it's your job to help identify them and say if they are invasive or not. So here is a list of all of the species we hope to cover. Nothing really new here. It's probably a lot of invasive species that you're used to looking at. We have them grouped into aquatic plants, emergent plants, and animals. So again, these are the species that you can choose from. If you have another species that you would like to look for that's not on the list that you think is locally relevant, you're very welcome to add that. And yeah, so just make this work for your local area. All right, protocol time. So the protocol is new this year. It's modified from past years. So experienced site leaders, if you've been spacing out and checking email, now's the time to tune back in. So if you remember from past years, there was one lake protocol and 4 different protocols for rivers. We've had a lot of feedback that is just too much for training on and for volunteers to remember. So this year, to make things easier, we have just one protocol that applies to lakes and rivers. So one protocol per station. If you've done a lake site for Snapshot Day or a boat landing site, this is going to look very familiar, because we basically just modified the lake protocol to apply to all stations. And just want to recognize Maureen Kelscher and Paul Skowinski, who helped out a lot to refine this protocol. A lot of thought went into it, into how volunteers experience this protocol and how they think about it. And so we think we're in a pretty good place with these protocols. But again, as you do these things, think of if there are ways you think that they can be improved. We're going to want to hear about it, and that that post-event survey. And so very welcome to feedback if you think we need to modify things going forward. So we're going to go through this protocol step by step. All right. Step one, you arrive at your site, be it a lake or a river. The first thing you're going to want to do is identify the boundaries of the area you're wanting to sample. So your search is going to start at one end and end at the other end of that site. Usually 50 to 100 feet is a good goal, but if you want to sample a little more or a little less, that's fine too. We know that some boat landings are very narrow if they're just a road leading down to a lake. Some access for stream is difficult and may be narrow due to vegetation or brush conditions. So again, modify this based on your site. If volunteers are not able to estimate like how far 50 feet is, I looked up a couple things that are 50 feet, and 50 feet is about the length of a semi, or interestingly, the length of a megalodon. And so, you know, depending on the sense of humor of your volunteers, you're welcome to use the megalodon reference. Otherwise, a semi is a good reference for 50 feet. So as you work from one end to another, you'll stop about 5 times, trying to space out each site equally. If there is a dock or a pier, stop at those places, even if they're not equally spaced. So again, this is something that
you broke up at when you work from one end to the other there.
Just based on, all right, on this slide.
Yeah, it was about 20 seconds ago.
Okay. So, okay, you're going to work from one end to another and stop about 5 times, trying to space out those sites equally. So if there's a dock or a pier, those are places you're going to want to stop at, even if they aren't equally spaced. And again, modify the number of stops based on your site. If you're at a really narrow site, you might only need to stop 3 times. I've had that happen before where the shoreline was really inaccessible and the sediment around the water was like outrageously soft and dangerous to walk in. So there wasn't a lot of room to move around. So again, modify the number of stops based on your location. 5 is a good number to shoot for, but sometimes your sites will only need 3 stops. So at each of the stops along the way, you're going to do the following. You're going to stand at each stop and scan the area for at least 30 seconds. If your area is really heavily vegetated, you'll probably have to scan for longer. If it's straight sand with a really grassy shoreline, 30 seconds is probably great. So just make sure you modify that based on what you need. You're going to use your hand scoop, or you can even just use your hands. Just pick up some sediment and sift through it. See if you find any small animals or plant fragments. If you're sampling strictly from the shoreline and you can't access the water to sift through sediment, that's totally fine. And then you got the old rake tossing. This is what Snapshot Day is known for. So at each of your stops along the way, these X's represent a stop along the way, you're going to want to throw a rake into the water twice, once to the left and once to the right. And again, if you're using a dock as a stop, walk to the end of it and throw the rake from the end of the dock. You can sample right at a boat launch. Just be careful of other boaters, obviously, but also know that these concrete slabs can be pretty slippery. So like this woman's doing in this picture, make sure you sample off to the side of it and just encourage volunteers to watch out for those slippery surfaces. Some sites just don't make sense to use a rope rake. So again, here, this is something you can modify based on your needs. Check out this site in the lower left-hand corner. Using a rope rake here would be like way overkill, right? So you can use a long-handled garden rake or no rake at all if you don't think you need it. We're going to ask about rake usage and hand scoop usage on the data sheet. So just know that it's okay. If you have a really narrow site, you're not going to be throwing rakes all over the site. It would just be very cumbersome and a little silly. So, you know, whereas if you're at a lake site like this, that rope rake really makes sense. And then finally, if you feel comfortable, and only if the volunteer feels comfortable, you can wade into the water to get a better look at things. But if you stay on shore, that's totally fine. So again, just reiterating, things are going to look a little different depending on the site you're at. This isn't a one size fits all here. It's one size fits best. So you might have a dock, you might not, you might need a rope rake. You might only have access to a long handled rake, like this volunteer right here is using a long handled rake to scoop up vegetation and to look at it. That's totally fine. Your site might be too narrow to use a rake at all again. So each of these are good sites to monitor. Each just looks a little bit different. And I hope that makes sense, but if not, please let me know. You can interrupt me or put questions in the chat if you need to. So after each monitoring station, before moving on to the next, make sure you instruct volunteers to stop and decon their gear. Talk to them about the importance of cleaning off their gear, have them remove attached animals, plants, mud on all equipment, the shoes, their waders. We're gonna again be providing a scrub brush so they can scrub their equipment with a brush, and we will provide those to you. And then rinse the area with water or a bleach solution. And again, we can provide spray bottles as needed. If you have a steam cleaner, you can lend those to volunteers, or even have like a mega cleaning station at the end of the day to steam everyone's gear at the very end if you like. Pump bottles, this is cut off in here, but there are also little handheld pump bottles. Those are great ways to decon gear too. So I want to stop here. Does anyone have any questions on the protocol itself at all? It's pretty straightforward.
Emily, do you have any tips about how to bag up samples, or if you have like a paper towel, or how to collect certain different kinds of things, or is that coming up later?
We are going to talk about specimen collection, but do you mean like in terms of like having a moist paper towel in the bag or anything like that? You still there? Can someone confirm, did I lose people again?
Yeah, well, he's mute. Matt, you're muted.
Yeah, Matt was breaking up. You've been sounding
okay.
good, Emily.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, thanks guys. So Matt, yeah, can you just clarify your question a little bit, just in terms of sample collection? You're asking about that?
Yeah, as far as just coolers, or volunteers sometimes come with a bunch of muck in a bag versus or plants in a bag. I guess it's just sampling protocols as far as how that actually, how you put stuff into a bag, or what you're looking for samples for vouchering and whatnot.
Yeah, we are going to talk about that a little bit here. And then after we go through that, if you have any other specific questions, then you're very welcome to interject that and ask, just to make sure I covered what you're looking for. I'm going to move on here. All right. So let's check the chat here. Thanks. Okay. Couple reminders on safety when you're working in right-of-ways. If you're working at a bridge or a stream crossing, you're likely to be working on a road right-of-way. So first off, know that as long as you're staying in the right-of-way, you can access a stream. But right-of-ways can vary depending on where you are. So my best advice for you is to look at your county GIS site, or to call the local highway department and ask them the full extent of the right-of-way. Please do not guess or assume that you're on a right-of-way or on public property. Make sure you're double checking that ahead of time. And that's for land. Once you're in the water, as long as your feet are wet, you're in a public navigable waterway, you should be good to go. So for safety, the biggest thing's common sense. I don't want y'all behaving like a dingbat just to get an extra sample point in, okay? So don't get in the water if there's a fast current. Don't make volunteers walk through overly soft sediment. Don't encourage deep water treks, especially if someone's wearing waders and there's a risk of topping them over. That can really be a deadly situation. So we want to avoid that. We want to avoid sites that have steep banks or overly rocky or heavily vegetated banks. Avoid dams, and really only do what you and your volunteers are comfortable with. If you're working in an area with high traffic, consider wearing a safety vest. Also consider not working in areas of high traffic. A little tip here again for stream stations: at each stream, make sure you walk downstream to upstream for visual purposes, so you aren't disturbing sediment. And then, there we go. And then within a watershed, because we're visiting several sites this day, it's a good thing to consider working upstream to downstream when moving amongst sites to prevent invasive species from downstream locations to upstream locations, okay? Sometimes the upstream downstream confuses people. So just to review those suggestions again, when you're working amongst sites, consider working upstream to downstream, and that's to prevent the invasive species from spreading downstream to upstream. So basically, work at your, your quote unquote cleanest site first, or your least invasive species rich site first, so that you're not spreading invasive species around to your other sites. So for example, if you know one of your sites has, a type of invasive snail or some type of really nasty invasive species, that's not going to be the site that you send people to first, because you don't want to risk them spreading that species around. Once you're at your individual site, it's nice to work downstream to upstream, and that's going to reduce the turbidity and the disturbance so that you can see better, because if you're stirring up all that muck, you might not be able to see anything. All right, the data sheet got a little facelift too. There is one data sheet per site, and note that it's pretty much the same as previous years. The same sections applied to volunteers, site leaders, and extension. You can see the yellow portion aligns with the part that UW Extension or I will fill out for you. So I'll send that to you pre-filled with the site name, the latitude and longitude of your site, and then the names of the site leader will be here. And then for volunteers, they'll be filling out this blue portion that we're going to go over, and site leaders, you will be filling out this pink portion here. So the volunteer filling out their sections in blue, they'll first need to fill out their name. This year we added metrics of effort. So this is where I talked about how we're going to be asking you if you used a rake or a hand scooper or anything in here. So if you've done this before, you're probably familiar with us asking if the volunteer used a rake or a hand scoop for monitoring. Now we're also asking if the volunteer walked along the shoreline. What this means is, did they walk and look between the rake throwing points? This will probably be yes for most people. And we're also asking if they checked surfaces like docks and piers. So these are man-made surfaces to check. We know that this won't be available at every site. If your site doesn't have any surfaces to check, then you can just circle NA. If they do have surfaces or any piers or docks or anything like that, but they didn't check those, then you would circle no. If they did check under those surfaces to see if, for any clinging animals or anything like that, then they would circle yes. And then, so that probably looks pretty familiar if you've done AIS monitoring before through those forms. So next, the volunteer is going to fill out any of their suspected species. We changed this column. It used to just say species. We changed it to suspected species just to take a little bit of pressure off the volunteer. So here again, they'll list something that they suspect that species is. So they'll say something like Eurasian water milfoil. And then next to it, in the columns next to it, they'll fill out area and density. These are just for what they can see. We don't expect volunteers to get into the water and do a full inventory of AIS. It's just what's visible, so that in the event that they find a legitimate invasive species, it's giving y'all an idea of what you might be getting into when you follow up on it. So it's good to know, did they find just one purple loosestrife plant, or did they find a huge patch of it? It's just going to be giving you a heads up on what you're about to be dealing with in the following days or months after this event. The next section is up to the site leader. Once the volunteer returns, you will indicate whether their initial ID was correct or not. If you need to submit a voucher specimen for verification, you fill that out here. So this is the same as in past years. If someone wrote Eurasian water milfoil here and it ends up being northern water milfoil, there's a little spot for you to write that here. So here's where we're going to be talking about specimen collection. If an invasive species has not been found in that water body previously, or if you're unable to identify a specimen, you'll need to collect it for verification. So the recommended way to do this is to try to collect up to 5 specimens of your suspected invasive species. If it's a plant, try to get the root systems, the leaves, and the flowers if they're present. I know that's not always possible, and you know, sometimes a volunteer might need a larger garbage bag for things like Phragmites or knotweed. If you can't get a specimen, maybe it's too far away or too big, make sure to instruct the volunteers to take a lot of photos and good notes, but make sure the goal is to grab a specimen. It's a lot easier for identification. And again, we will be providing baggies for people to put those invasive species in. I always like to say to people, to kind of circle back to Matt's question a little bit, we don't hand out paper towels. If you want to hand out those to keep specimens a little bit more moist, that's fine. Otherwise, I always recommend just putting a little bit of water in the baggie with the plant, and that should keep it nice and supple for you to identify later. If someone brings back something native or it's something that's already been found in a water body, you can just throw it away. You can put plants in a garbage bag, label them that they're invasive, and throw them away. Just make sure they're tied really tight. Animals can take a little freezer nap. They can be bagged, and then you can throw them away as well. If you need to verify something based on a photo and not a specimen, then that would be when something hasn't been found in the water body, if it's an NR40 species, or if you're unsure how to identify something, you're very welcome to take pictures of these things. Just make sure that photos are clear and focused. It's good for them to have something in scale. A data sheet is a really good thing to have in the back is scale for the size of your specimen. The data sheets are printed on waterproof paper. A hand is an okay thing to use for scale, but you know, like a pen or something that's commonly sized is good to have in the picture. And make sure you're getting really clear pictures. If something is happening, or if you find something that you think is like, say, a rusty crayfish, it's important to have the side of that crayfish in scale or in view so that we can see this rusty spot, and make sure things are nice and clear. So here's an example of a photo we don't want to see. This is a photo that a volunteer sent me that they were worried that this was a faucet snail. I commend the volunteer for being concerned and for looking to identify things. It's just that photos like this are a little bit too blurry to identify. So we don't want to be sending Sasquatch photos out here. We want to be sending nice, clear pictures, please. If you are a past site leader, this is for you. If you're a new site leader, then please space out for a moment. I just want to cover this. Excuse me. You might be familiar with the old verify voucher forms that were handed along in with specimens when it came time to get your samples verified by a DNR coordinator. We decided this year that this form's a little redundant and not necessary. So as long as you turn in your samples with a copy of your data sheet, you should be fine not to use this form. So I just wanted to clarify for past site leaders, we will not be using this form again. Are there any questions at all so far? Okay. So again, after each site, make sure volunteers know how to prevent the spread of invasive species. So the goal of our event here is to not spread invasive species around, right? So it's a good idea. Minimize teams visiting more than one watershed, again, working upstream to downstream in that watershed. Make sure you provide rinse equipment so volunteers can scrub their equipment and rinse it after each site. If you like, it's a good idea to demonstrate this at the beginning of the site and then have like a final super decon at the end if needed. If someone needs things, if you need things like steam cleaning or things like that, doing those at the end of the day is a really good idea.
Hey, Emily, quick question for you.
Yeah.
Stephanie asked, can you add a ruler to the edge of the data collection sheet to help size a specimen?
Steph, that is like the most excellent idea I've heard all day. That is definitely something that I can do. I'm going to write it down right now.
Idea for Snapshot swag bag, Matt says, branded rulers.
Oh, branded rulers. I'll write
Branded.
that idea down too.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right, so finally at the end of your day, you're going to wrap things back up at the training site. So you're going to identify things that volunteers bring back, determine if the species need to be verified in vouchers, and then again, provide some refreshments if you want to. Don't forget to hand out your Culver's coupons. That's what the volunteer appreciation is here. Okay, so you went out, you collected your data. Now what do you do with everything? It depends. Your regional DNR coordinator will get anything you need to voucher. So give them those and they can be a verifier on it. If they want, you can also give them copies of your data sheets. Remember that if you're verifying a new species, you need 2 verifiers to verify that species. And so if you have another coordinator on site working with you that day and they can be the second verifier of it, that's great. If not, if you're leading the Snapshot Day training on your own, you will need a second verifier for any new species that you find. I'm also going to need you to submit a few things to the box. I'm going to make a folder for each site and you can, and I'm going to send you links on how to find them. But basically you just upload scanned data sheets, your copies of your registration sheets and liability forms, those completed data sheets, and then also be sure to take lots and lots of pictures and upload those too. We use those pictures. You can see I've been using all of your pictures for trainings, but we also use those for story maps to promote the events in the future. And we use them for a lot of different outreach and recruitment materials. So photos are really, really important and we appreciate you taking those. Then the week after Snapshot Day, there is a little bit of follow-up. You'll need to submit the data that you collect into SWIMS. I'm going to show you that in a second because the SWIMS data entry looks a little bit new this year. And then, like I said, submit your vouchers as needed and your data sheets and pictures right into the box. If you want, it might be a good idea to set up a meeting with your regional DNR coordinator in advance, just to assist with any verification you need. Again, keeping in mind that 2 verifiers are needed for that verification process. All right, so everyone's favorite topic is SWIMS, and that's what we're going to talk about next. What exactly goes into SWIMS? Pretty much everything. Even if you do not find any new invasive species, every site you monitor should be entered. I'm going to assign you a Snapshot Day 2022 project to your SWIMS accounts, and the monitoring sites you choose will be added to it. I think everyone here has used SWIMS on the call. If you haven't and you need an extra hand setting up your account, or you don't know how to use SWIMS, maybe it's your first time using it, me or your DNR regional coordinator can assist you. Just let us know. We'll be very happy to help you. And all of your post Snapshot Day data and photos and everything like that has to be in by August 27th. So that's a week after the event. Data entry is pretty quick, and so it shouldn't take you too long to get in your data in within a week after the event. So this is what some screenshots from SWIMS here. This is the first part of the data entry. It's going to look the same as last year's. You'll have your 2022 projects selected here. You'll insert the name of your data collectors. You can use the binocular tool if you need to look them up. And then make sure your station name is matched with where you were at. I'll be adding the stations to the project, so your station should pop up here. If it's not, you can just let me know and I can add it. You're going to add the date. In SWIMS, I can't add dates that are in the future, so I had to put April 2nd in here, but this will be August 20th for everyone. You can put the time for the start and end time, so volunteers are asked to put that on their data sheets. And then this form will pop up automatically for you, and you just hit next. And this is where it starts to look a little different here. So you'll notice it looks a lot more like the AIS monitoring forms if you've ever done that. So what we're asking for is, did you look for these target species? And each of these has a drop-down box here. So did you look for Brazilian waterweed? Did you look for curly leaf pondweed? I'm just going to go back. I saw a question in the chat. Should volunteers be added as data collectors? I will add those for you as volunteers sign up for the event. I can add them in there for you. So it should be easy to pop up there. If not, and you need to add a data collector, then if you can do that, then you can add them, or you can also always contact me and I can help you out with the swim side of things. So what we're asking you for is if you looked for each of these target species. So again, each of the target species has a drop down box wondering, did you look for Brazilian waterweed? Did you look for curly leaf pondweed, et cetera, all the way down those target species. And then under result, this drop down menu will say yes or no. What you're going to do is choose yes if you taught your volunteers how to identify those organisms the day of your training. Okay. So a lot of people do not teach volunteers how to identify Brazilian waterweed. And so if you did not teach your volunteers how to identify one of these species, then you choose no for that. If you taught them how to identify a species, then you would choose yes. So say I didn't train my volunteers how to identify Brazilian waterweed, I would choose no for that. But I did train them how to identify curly leaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil, then both of those drop downs will get a yes. That's something new that we added this year so that we can get what's called negative data, or sites where we are assuming those species are not present at. Then it's going to ask for your methods down here. This should look the same as your data sheets and similar to past years down here, asking if you used a hand scoop, you used a rake, things like that. That's going to line up again with your data sheet. So look and see what the volunteers circled for that. And then you can use the corresponding drop-down box to say, yes, I used a hand scoop. Yes, I used a rake. No, I did not walk along the shoreline. Okay. If you did not find any invasive species at the site, you can use the bottom box to enter that, that no target species were observed. So this will drop down here and say no target species were observed. If you did find invasive species present, you'll hit that invasive species were found down here. And then you can hit species found to enter your invasive species data for that station. I hope that made sense the way I say that. So if you didn't find anything, you say no, you can just save and go to your next station. But if you did find something, you say yes here, and then we're going to click species found to enter that information. Let's see here. So entering the invasive species found, it should line up with your data sheet again, where you enter the name of your invasive species. This will drop down and have a whole list of the invasive species to choose from. Remember that we're only entering confirmed invasive species here. So if someone found something native, we're not entering that. So choose the species that you found, the estimated area and density. It's going to ask you if you collected a sample and took a photo, and then it'll also ask who you submitted those photos to. So again, looking really similar to our AIS monitoring form if you've done that one before. And it really, it's meant to walk you through the whole process. But again, if you're entering this and you get a little confused, then just let us know and we're gonna guide you through the SWIMS process. And if you found another species at the site, you can hit next species found and do the same thing with that. Otherwise, you can just save and return to list. So that's starting to wrap up Snapshot Day here. I just want to give one more tiny little ditty for you. Follow through with your volunteers, either the day of or a week or so later. We survey volunteers after these Snapshot Day trainings, and based on survey responses we've gotten from volunteers over the years, volunteers don't necessarily just want to collect species and specimens and go home. They really want to learn more about invasive species. So some specific things that volunteers have said they want to know is, what happens to their data? Are you going to use it for anything? Where does it go? So you can explain to them that it goes into that database. What happens with any invasive species you find? Are you going to go back for a more thorough survey? Are you going to come back and pull something? Are you going to monitor it in the future? And then also, is there a way for them to be involved in that future management? Can they come out again and help pull something? Can they help remove something? Can they help monitor something for the future for you? Ask the volunteers if they want to be on your volunteer email list for future projects. Many volunteers say that they leave thinking, now what? So just a little more follow through there. you know, you can let them know that there are other projects they can get involved in, like CLMN, Project Red, if they get really into the monitoring invasive species. Just let them know other ways that they can help out. Don't let them leave thinking, now what, where did my data go? So you want to end on a nice positive note. And then your volunteers will leave and they will go off into the sunset with a rainbow over it, and they will give you lots of nice data. And then you will enter your data into SWIMS as we went over it. So with that, that about wraps up what Snapshot Day site leader training is all about. But if there are any lingering questions, I can take them at this time. Okay. Any recommendations about how many species is a manageable number of species to cover the day of? I think when I was a site leader training, I probably covered 6 or 7. Are there any other site leaders that have recommendations on the number of species that they've taught their volunteers for the day of? Let's see, Paul says 6 to 10. Yeah. I wouldn't, you know, the fewer and more concentrated that you have it, the volunteer is going to be less likely to be overwhelmed, and they're going to be more likely to identify those things in the field and identify them more accurately. So you don't want to overwhelm the volunteer by going over 10 by any means. Okay. All right, so if anyone has any other questions here, you're very welcome to email me. My email address is right here. We are recording this webinar, and so if you need to come back and watch anything, you can do that. There's also the site leader handbook that's going to be in the box. If you have questions, you can reference that as well. Okay, a couple questions came in here. On the form, is there a comment section for observations that aren't collected or other data? Yes, I think, let me see if I had that on the form that I had here. So there is an other observations and notes section down here. So if anyone wants to write anything else down, they can do that there. Let me see here. How do I get back to my chat? Paul recommended if they're all new to invasive species, they'll have a hard time remembering more than that. So when we were talking about the maximum species to teach people, the provided ID resources will help refresh their memory on the ones they were trained on at the beginning of Snapshot Day. Yep, that's all very good advice, Paul. Okay. So again, any questions that you have, just make sure to shoot me an email. I'll be very, very happy to help you out. And thank you for coming today. I'm going to put the recording of this into the box for you to reference at a future time. And thank you so much for coming. Happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you, and have a great rest of your day.